everybody. Welcome back to Unbroken Arrows podcast. As always, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Greg. And today our guest is Doug Duren. Doug describes himself as a land manager, an aspiring conservationist, and as an irregular contributor to Meat Eater with Stephen Ranella. I like that, Doug. I think that's a clever way of saying that.
Irregular?
Irregular, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not only is it, well, that's nice if you think it's clever, it's accurate.
Well, both then, I guess. But Doug is also the founder of Sharing the Land, which is an initiative that works with landowners to help them plan and conduct land management projects with the help of volunteers. And in return, those volunteers are allowed access to the land for a variety of activities, which could be hunting, fishing, foraging, birding, just to name a few. Doug's farm has been in his family for over 120 years, and he took over the management of the property about 25 years ago. And Doug is actually the first Unbroken Arrows podcast repeat guest as we sat down for a short interview at the Pheasant Fest Quail Classic this past March. So welcome back, Doug. It's an honor to have you on our podcast again.
Well, it's nice to be back. I really enjoyed our conversations at Pheasant Fest, so I'm happy to get the opportunity to follow up.
Well, awesome. And you actually get to now interact with Catherine as well, because Catherine had some other responsibilities on that particular day. So she gets to have her voice heard too.
There we go.
Well, great. That's great.
Well, today, though, our focus is not necessarily on conservation with regard to the Sharing the Land initiative, but your story is about your family and your farm. And I will begin with this question, and you can take it any path you wish, Doug. But you have a hat with the letters NBNY in large print and with the letters MDT in smaller print below. What's the story behind the letters on that hat?
Well, it has to do with my younger brother, Matthew Todd Duren, who my late younger brother, he died just over 29 years ago. And has to do with the NBNY, has to do with the last deer hunt that he and I did together. We didn't know it was the last deer hunt at the time, but it was Thanksgiving Day of 1994. And I had been out deer hunting on the farm, and Matthew was living at the farm at the time. And he didn't go out that day. He'd already taken a buck with his bow and shot I guess he shot another buck with his gun, but then he'd already killed 3 or 4 deer. And so he was sleeping in on Thanksgiving Day, but I was back in the part of the farm. And as I came across back to the buildings, not far from the buildings, this nice buck, biggest buck I'd killed up to that time, got up and ran, and it went broadside to me, and I shot and hit it. It went down and then got back up, and now it kind of got into an unsafe situation where it went in towards our buildings, got in amongst the buildings, and Matt had heard me shoot and looked out the window and saw this deer moving through the barnyard and or the farmyard, and threw on his orange jacket. Apparently he was wearing his long johns in bed. Slipped on his boots, grabbed his rifle. He was completely legal, came out through the old farmhouse door and actually busted a hole in the screen, and that's there, that remains to this day. And he and I chased this deer around the buildings, and it was kind of an unsafe situation. So we were trying to get it in a spot where we could kill it. It was mortally wounded, but anyway, we were trying to put it out of its misery. And my dad happened to be hunting, and he came down off the hill at the same time, or about the same time. And between the three of us, we were able to get the thing corralled and finish it off. And it was really quite an experience. And then I looked at Matthew, and here he is with his orange jacket, his long johns on, and that was it. And so we had a good laugh about that. And my father started talking about the deer, and he said, "Gee, that's a good buck, nice 8-pointer." And Matthew, who was really encouraging us at that time, 30 years ago, to do more buck management, letting maybe younger ones go, and that sort of thing, looked at it, and this was his way. He said, yeah, that's a good buck, but boy, that had been a nice buck next year.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a moment that when he died in a car accident, then in January, a couple of months later, it was a moment that I remembered. And so we had hunting hats made for the farm that said NBNY and a little logo on there, and then his initials MTD underneath it. And the first time that Pat hunted with me, I was wearing the hat. I didn't even think about it. It was just a hat that I always wore. And after he and I got to, he killed a nice doe on our farm, and when we got together, Pat Durren asked me about it, and he ended up writing a story about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what our topic is today. We asked you back to talk about Matthew, his legacy, and his impact on you, and the direction that you went with how you managed the family farm.
That story, someone told anyways, I think on the documentary on Netflix, right?
Yeah, we did talk about it on Stars in the Sky,
yes.
A hunting story with Steve. There have been a lot of coincidences. I'm not sure what I believe in life, but I do believe in serendipity.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I believe in magic, or I know I believe in serendipity and wishes, I guess is how I will put that. Making wishes and then things that happen in serendipity. There's a long story behind that, but there's actually a tree that we didn't talk about on the documentary, but Steve and I were walking down through the woods, and I had told him the story earlier when they were doing the interview about Matt, and he already kind of knew the story of Matt and I, and but there's a tree in the woods that I'd never seen, and it was the last place that he and I had hunted out in the woods. It was a place that we used to sit together in the woods, even when he was a little boy, because he was significantly younger. When Matt died at age 22, I was 36.
Okay.
So Matthew was a much younger. He was almost like a grandchild to my parents.
Mm-hmm.
They had 5 kids. Like, my older sister is she's 72, I guess. My older brother is in his late 60s. And then all of a sudden there were 5 of us crowded pretty much together. Every 2 or 3 years there was another kid. And then a long time went by. My younger sister, I think, was 10 when Matthew was born, and I remember my mom was in her mid 40s when we were told that we were going to have another sibling, and we were all like, and I was 14, so of course I knew a little bit about birds and the bees, but I thought, isn't mom kind of old to be having a baby? And we had this great family discussion about it all, and she indeed was, but Matthew was healthy, happy, safe, and secure, but he was raised a little bit differently than the rest of us, almost like a grandchild, Mm-hmm. So by the time he was walking and talking and being more of a person, I was already off to college, Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things are kind of all a part of this story. And I don't know if you guys know of the meaning of the name Matthew, mm-hmm. but I understand it to be a gift from God. Mm-hmm. And my parents named him Matthew because they felt like that was an appropriate name, right, given how that all happened. And he really was. He was a cool little kid, I mean, it was like I had a baby brother when I was, older like that. And I remember when he was, I don't know, about the time you should start talking more, like 2 or 3, that he wasn't saying much. And my mom took him in to see Dr. Pearson, who was the same doctor we all had when we were kids, and said to Dr. Pearson, I'm a little concerned that he couldn't talk very much. And he said, you have 5 other kids who are all older, and they're talking. He can't get a word in edgewise. He can't get a word in
edgewise. I knew where this was going.
I wouldn't worry about it. But it always reminds me of that story about Einstein, who apparently didn't speak for a long time when he was a kid. Mm-hmm. And I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's one of those little stories that I like. And when Einstein was a kid, he didn't speak for a long time. And then finally, his first words were, the soup is too hot. And his parents were like, thank goodness you can talk. And after all this time, why did you not say anything? And he said that, well, up until now, everything has been in order. I didn't say it was a funny story.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was Matthew, and then I moved off and went to school and I did some other stuff. But then I came back and I don't know, we always had, we stayed in touch and everything, but it wasn't like, oh, this is the brother I grew up with. Mm-hmm. Like I have an older brother who's a couple years older, and I've got a younger brother who's a couple years younger, and we're real close, not only in age, but we've always done things together and we're really close. So Matthew was very different than that. But he was a wonderful kid. And the other thing that was different about him is all the rest of us, when we graduated from Weston High School outside of Casanova here where we live, where I now live again, 300, town of 325 people. And quite honestly, if you would have told me when I was 20 years old that you will move back in 40 years, I would have laughed and said, well, that's not going to happen. But I did. And Matt is a part of that story as well. So I was living in Door County at the time. I had been teaching high school out in New Hampshire in the 80s, and we moved back in 1990. I'm living up in Door County, and I started a landscape business up there. And it's a beautiful. Door County is the thumb of Wisconsin that goes up into Lake Michigan, if you know where it is. And Matt was very different than the rest of us in that we all took off and went somewhere. Matt went off to school for one semester after high school, and he came back to my parents and said, I don't want to do that. He had already... and also, unlike the rest of us who just kind of did what we wanted to do, he had a plan. And he presented it to my parents. He said, I don't want to be in school. I don't want to be in college. I want to learn a trade. And I've already talked to Richard Smith, who had an electrician's business, and he's willing to hire me and I can be an apprentice there. I can live at the farmhouse and I'll be nearby and I will get this. I want to do this and get this job and get this training and all of that. And my folks loved the idea for a couple of different reasons. As I said, the rest of us were gone. I mean, we were living in other parts of the country.
Right.
And he had kind of been raised, like I said, as a grandchild. He was, I know parents don't have favorite children, but Matthew was a favorite.
They do have favorites. 100%.
And so, he was just sort of he was an outdoorsman, right? He was a hunter and a fisher, and he was in his element living here. And the guy that he worked for, and he took trips out west. And so, he was really at this place for 3 years where life was sort of idyllic for him. He had a good job. He was learning a trade. He was living at the farm. He was hunting. He was fishing, doing all of those things. And my siblings and I were like, this is great. Matt's living on the farm. Because we kind of had this notion about what's going to happen with the farm.
Right.
We quit dairy farming in 1988. And so this was Matt died in 94. So this was after that. And there were some beef cattle on the farm and that sort of stuff. But, Matt's there to take care of it. And he's kind of there to he can keep an eye on the folks too, right? Because they were starting to get older. And so, sort of everything's just fine. And then after we have this deer hunt and we, we're talking about plans about other stuff that we were going to do on the property, January of 1995, he died in a car accident, right actually by the farm on the highway that goes through the farm. And, it was traumatic for my parents and for our family and really kind of for the whole community. The outpouring of love and compassion to my folks and to my brothers and sisters and I was really I tear up a little bit now even thinking about how
humbling it was.
How humbling it was. But the other thing that I found out was what a cool guy my brother was. There were literally hundreds of people, young people his age, who came through and talked about him. And I was like, my brother, the really quiet guy? He was a friend to everybody. And boy, and there were some crying girls too, and they just loved him, and it was just like, because he was this wonderful, young man who had lots of friends. And one thing that I'll tell you, when we buried him up at the St. Anthony's Cemetery, St. Anthony's Catholic Church, where we all went to school when we were young and went to church, that burial was actually on my birthday, January 20th. And there was just this crowd of, it seemed like hundreds of people And, and maybe it was. I just can't. It just seemed like a sea of people. And I was trying to wrap my head around the whole, the spiritual part of it and what's happening, what happens when this happens. Why does this happen and what happens to him? And at that moment, as I was thinking about that, and, the priest is doing what they do, and I'm not like focused on that. I'm looking out at this crowd of people, and it starts to snow. And it's those great big snowflakes that you see, and they just fall for a few minutes on everyone standing there. And I could just see these big snowflakes hitting people and on their jacket. And I thought, that's it. A little bit of him is with everybody in this crowd. He's had an effect on everybody who's here. And that was just sort of symbolic of that. And so that was, the story of his death and burial, and where we got to, at least that far. Devastating to my parents, devastating to my siblings and I. And as I said, this effect on the community. And there was the guy who was driving the car put on trial, even though he didn't want him to be, for drunk driving, and there was all these things that went on. And so there was just like, for a couple of years, there was just all this turmoil. And then that question of, well, after a couple of years, the questions of, what are we going to do now? What about the farm, and what about the folks, and and all of that. So those things, those questions, and that all started to come up again.
You mentioned some of the things that have happened that you maybe can't explain, or we talked a little bit about that with regard to those topics with Pat Durren as well. And one of the things that I know over the years I've observed, and I think of it as I think we're more hypersensitive to some of those things. But I'll share a story with you that happened here just about a month ago when due to COVID, and my wife died right before COVID. And this is my first wife, and she died in November of 19. So right prior to when COVID shut everything down. And as a result of that, monuments and those types of things, there was a big backlog. So even though we ordered it, it took a while for us to get that. And it was my first visit back to the monument after she was interned into the monument. I went and visited the memorial site, and as I was leaving, I saw I had a missed call from my daughter, and I called, and as I was talking to her, I looked up, and there was a cardinal in the tree, in the lilac bush that was there. And, the symbolism behind the cardinal and loved ones being, and again, I don't know how much I believe those types of things, but I will have to say that did take me back a little bit in terms of that whole sequence of events. And at that moment I believed, so,
Sure.
So what were some of the things, if you would share, that did happen, or that were just things that kind of were curious and made you think about those types of interactions thereafter?
Well, the one I think I started to tell, and
I was
then I realized
I think you were going somewhere with a tree.
Well, part of your job, Catherine, is to reel me back in, right? But then I realized halfway through the story about Steve is that about doing that documentary part is that we actually didn't talk about the tree. There was I think a photo added a little bit, but so we went back and they interviewed me at the local gin mill, because, as my mother used to call the tavern, because it's Wisconsin, and there were a bunch of deer on the wall in there too. And so that's where we're doing like the sit down part of the interview for that documentary. But Steve and I had known each other for a while by then, and so he knew a bunch of the stories. And the story that he wanted me to tell was that of Matthew, and then how I killed this big deer later, and then sort of how it was the full circle of it. And to me, it was a remembrance of a hunt. But the other thing is that the year after Matt died, so like I said, he died in January, and then I went to the following November for gun hunting. I thought, well, I'm going to go on hunt from Matt's favorite stand, his proverbial last stand, as it were. And so I went up there, and as I'm walking into the woods to go and, make sure this stand is okay. And an area that I'd walked through dozens of times before. Here is a white oak tree that there's two of them, and they form a V, and they are 10, 15 inches in diameter. So those trees have been there for a long time. And there's two of them, and they form this V, and in between them is this branch that's growing. You can't tell which one which side it originates in and which it terminates in. This is the shared branch between the two of them. And I stopped there, and I was just startled by it because, like I said, I'd been there dozens of times before, and I had never seen that tree before. Maybe I had walked at it differently. And clearly it had always been there. But there was just something about the way I walked in there that day, and I stopped and I looked at it, and from this day forward, it's been known as the brother tree. And that's every time any of us walk by there, there's a trail that goes by it now that, you stop, you just pause there for a moment and think about him. And we walked through there, and I remember, touching the tree, and I thought, too far. I can't really talk about that with, I don't want to cry on camera kind of stuff, right? And we ended up having a conversation about it. In fact, I as we're walking through the woods, I just started shouting at Steve and asking him questions about trees, and do you know what kind of tree that is? And do you know what that is? And, trying to trip him up on that kind of stuff just to distract myself. But we had a conversation about it, kind of off camera. On the way back up, one of the photographers took a picture of it, and they may have worked it in there. I don't remember exactly. But so that was one of the things. So, so I went out to that stand then, and it was the first time. So that would have been the fall of 1995, and that was the first time that I let a buck go. I mean, we just always, if it had an antler, you shot it. Right? I mean, and that was kind of trying, he was like, maybe if we let some of these little ones go, we might get some bigger ones.
Yeah.
And this was all before CWD and all that stuff started, right? And we were really learning about herd dynamics and population, and we were talking about taking more does, and we were doing that. I mean, not like we're doing now, but, it's learning process. So I went out and sat in Matt's last stand, and I see this doe go by down at the bottom, and a buck goes by. And he's a little, year and a half old, forky. I would have shot him the year before. I'd have shot him right away. It was remarkable. 5 more bucks walked by, one after another, and they got progressively bigger. And the last one wasn't, it was a 3-year-old, a nice, biggest buck I'd shot up to that time. And I'm like, well, this is the one. To this day, I think about, what was that, Matthew, like proving the point, if we think about that woo-woo-y kind of stuff and people still being there. And Matthew, like proving the point, let them go, and they're going to keep getting bigger. And then I also could never think what would have happened. I can never help but think what would have happened if I let that one go. Was there another big one coming? It just seemed too good to be true, so I shot it. So that was one of the stories, and one of the things that happened as a result of it. And I know we mostly wanted to talk about Matthew, but I can't talk about him without talking about my father, who they were really close. Like I said, almost like a grandfather. I mean, Matt was 4 when my grandpa died, or his grandpa too.
Right.
I remember it very distinctly, but because I was a senior in high school. But anyway, my father and I were pretty close, and he was a big hunter and outdoorsman, and I learned a lot of things from him. A lot, and I'm still learning things from him, and things, of course, he didn't know anything when I was a teenager. It was amazing to me how much my father had learned by the time I was 25 years old.
I think we all go through that.
Well, when I was a senior in high school, I asked if I could borrow his favorite deer rifle, and it was this beautiful walnut stock Browning 30-06, made in Belgium. This really special gun. Every other rifle we had was pretty much just something we picked up. It wasn't special at all. So I said, "Hey, Dad, I'm a senior in high school here. I'm 18 years old. I was 17 years old, I guess, at the time." I said, "Any chance I could borrow your rifle to go hunting with the fellas today?" It was the day after Thanksgiving, which is during the gun season, and my dad was a real mail carrier. And he goes, "Well, I guess that'd be all right." But he was definitely reluctant. knowing that as this become to be known about me is that I'm kind of hard on stuff. So he's this beautiful corduroy case with this red velvet interior, and this rifle lays in there like I don't know, like it's a relic, things just beautiful. So I take this thing and I go hunting with my buddies, and we're about to set up this deer drive, and I pull the thing out of the back seat of my buddy's car, and I unzip it, and I pull that gun out, and everybody's like, "Wow, nice! That's the old man let you bring the gun." And I was like, "Yeah." And so I turn around, and when I did, either somebody bumped me or I bumped the door, and I dropped the gun. That rifle hit the ground. The barrel hit the first, and the back of the stock hit second, and it cracked right on the pistol grip.
Oh.
And everybody just stepped back.
Oh, no.
Oh, my God. What are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm not going hunting. I mean, I was losing. My dad was a powerful man. Let's put it that way. So I go home. My dad was a rural mail carrier, and he would get done with the mail around about 1:30, 2 o'clock, and then he would come home. And so I get home, and I have the case sitting on the couch, and I'm just sitting there, and he walks in and he says, "I thought you were hunting." I said, "Well, I was, and I have something to tell you." And I go over and I unzip the case, and I said, "I dropped the rifle, tried to explain, I will work and get a new stock made for it. Walnut. Well, that's a walnut stock made of." And I'm like, "I understand, but I will get that done." But everything. And he looks at it, and my dad was a little prone to. He was, like I said, he was a powerful guy. And when I was a kid, he definitely believed in spare the rod and spoil the child. So I was thinking, well, this is going to be, I don't know what's going to happen. How enraged is he going to be about this? But he had exactly the opposite reaction. He looked at it, he turned it over, and he looked at it, and he looked at me with a look of disappointment that I will never forget. Mm-hmm. And he slid it back in the case and said, "No, that's okay. I'll take care of it." He zipped it up, and so off he goes. Well, the next deer season comes around, and the rifle emerges from the case. He had taken Elmer's glue and just forced it into the cracks and the broken parts, and then put black electrical tape on it. I mean, he hoked it up in such a way that it was going to work, right? It was going to be fine. So I was 19 years old at the time, and my dad deer hunted until he was 82 or 83 years old. So every year after that, for the next 35 years, whatever it was, every deer season, he would pull that rifle out. And if nobody else said it, he would say something. "Yeah, I used to have a really nice rifle until some darn kid dropped it, and now I got this thing."
So you relived it every year.
Every year it was like I didn't get any kind of punishment for it at the time, but every year I was humiliated by that story. And he would pull that rifle out and just set it in the corner at the old farmhouse, waiting for somebody else to bring it up, which of course
they did.
Everybody wanted to do, right? So every year that goes on and on. So then my dad dies, and he asked me if I would put, and then he was cremated, if I would put a little bit of his ashes under his favorite deer stand on the farm. You know where? Yes, I do. So I actually put a 30-06 shell full of his ashes under his tree, under this stand that was in this tree. And opening weekend's coming up, and my older brother says, "Well, one of us needs to take the old man's rifle out." After he died. So we flipped the coin or drew straws. I don't remember what we did. And I ended up doing it. So I take it to that stand. I go up in that tree. And my brother moves through the woods like midday in the afternoon of opening day. And just deer start coming at me. And they're not running hard. They're just moving through the woods. And then all of a sudden I start seeing antlers. And I see another set of antlers. And there's like a half a dozen bucks. And I pick out the biggest one. And he is 65 yards away. This one doe had all their attention. And I pull that rifle up, and I was going to shoot a big old buck with my dad's rifle. And I pull the trigger, and that deer doesn't move. So I'm sure you both have had this experience where you're a little bit dumbfounded by that. So I rack another one, then I aim again, and I shoot again, and that deer doesn't move. And so now I'm getting a little panicky, right? So I rack another one real quick, and at that moment, that doe takes off and runs down the hill, and he runs with her. I take another shot at him. 10 minutes later, my brother comes walking through the woods, and he goes, so I tell him the story. He's like, "You're kidding me. It was right there." I'm like, and we couldn't find any evidence of where the bullets hit or anything. My dear friend, Greg Kiefer, who knew my dad, also says, "Well, you know what happened? You're up there, you're getting ready to shoot." And by the time I pulled the trigger the third time, I had tears in my eyes. And, because this whole thing that I thought was going to happen wasn't happening. And Greg says, "Well, you know what happened is your old man was up there bumping your elbow every time you were pulling the trigger."
He was getting back at you again.
That's exactly it. I was just like, and that's the way things are. It seems like with us in the Durren farm, the place is, has been in my family for 120 plus years now, and it's just everywhere I look is a story. And a memory. And that was a part of what we talked about on Steve's documentary.
Well, and that's one of the things that we try to encourage and try to promote. We have lost things throughout our lives. We've had experiences that we wouldn't wish upon anyone. But, telling the story is healing as well. And telling the story is something that allows the memories to live on. But the other thing is you need to create more memories, and you're going to continue to create those memories and therefore create more stories to tell and to pass on.
Well, and back to Matthew again. So because we had this situation where we kind of felt like everything was in order because he was there and everything was taken care of. If there's a silver lining in anything like that, after a few years, so that's been 29 years ago, and I pretty much took over management of the farm about 4 years later, certainly cooperatively with my dad, and then 20 years ago was pretty much my sole responsibility. We started to think about what we were going to do with the property, and now things had changed because of losing Matthew. And so first thing we decided was, well, we have to come up with a way of honoring not only the family legacy, but Matthew's legacy. So when we formed an LLC, we called it Matt/Tree Stand LLC. And that is the name of our family partnership that owns and controls the land. And when we sat down to come up with our mission statement or our goals and objectives for that LLC, one was about legacy, both the family legacy and Matthew's legacy. We thought about and came up with this as a general goal. We want to do the best thing for the land. And anybody who knows about land management and conservation is that can be a moving target, right?
Sure.
Things change. You have to be able to adapt and all of that. And then one of the things we also wanted to do was be a good example. Matt was a great example of a very good human being who was a good friend and all of that. So we wanted to make sure that we were doing things that would be a good example of stewardship. And then it dawned on us the idea that we would also like to share this experience with people. And it immediately started out with inviting a few more people, family and friends, to the farm for, various things. Because again, it's no longer a dairy farm like it was when I was a kid that we worked on. It's completely a conservation-based property. So we started to do that, and really, it was a part of the impetus for my Sharing the Land initiative. When I approached my brothers and sisters about that I wanted to do this and I wanted to use the farm as a model, that they were like, this falls in line completely with our mission statement, but then also it falls in line completely with my conservation mantra and the one that they also adopted, which was, it's not ours, it's just our turn. And so all of those things sort of tie together. And I guess I can't think of a better way of honoring my brother.
Mhm.
I can't think of a better way of honoring my parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents and my family legacy in this area. And the other part of it was a big part of the healing of our sorrow of having, lost him. But it's something his nieces and nephews who he never met,
Mhm.
all know the story. Pat wrote that wonderful article. I have it here on my office wall here.
Mhm.
There's another copy of it out at the farm. Anybody who comes there knows who Matt was.
Mhm.
And how that now has motivated us, and how it's a part of the story of our farm.
Mhm. And legacy is a good word. It's
Mhm.
actually the perfect word for that. It's his legacy as well, and your family's legacy.
Yeah, we've been talking about the nice buck next year thing, right? Because that was
Mhm.
big giant buck management, right? Oh, he'd been a nice buck next year, and I could still hear him saying it.
Mhm.
Oh, it had been a nice buck next year, because he was a man of few words his whole life.
Mhm.
The rest of us, he can't shut us up. But that'd have been a nice buck next year, just the way he said it. So we were really getting into how can we do a better job of managing the property and managing the deer and all of that? And I went through that phase of food plots, and which we don't do anymore. I don't take sand to the beach either. I don't know why I would put food plots in farm country.
Mhm.
And the buck management thing has evolved in that we don't make selections based on, that one, let's let him go because he'll be a bigger buck next year. It's
Right.
much more about, let's do the best thing for the herd and for the healthy deer management. And so nice buck next year is sort of evolving into, by doing good management, we will still have nice bucks next year.
Right.
But we don't impose any kind of management. Oh, you can't shoot a smaller buck. It made deer hunting on our place so much easier for me to be able to say, there are two rules. One is take a good ethical shot, and two is at any deer that you will be happy with, and we will be happy with you. And it's just made the whole thing so much easier. That's not to say you can't let a buck go, and we get excited about big bucks and all of that, but that's no longer this sort of focus or concern that anybody has to worry about.
Well, that's kind of a rite of passage too, isn't it? I think for a lot of hunters, when you first start hunting, a lot of folks have that desire, I guess, to have that, mounted head or the antlers. But I think if you really start to go through that process of that evolution as a hunter, I think that you start to look at anything that you harvest as something that is a gift, and it's the hunt, it's the chase, it's the people that you were with. Bob St. Pierre talked about how when he prepares his food for the freezer, he will write some things about the day, the weather, what it was like, who he is with, and he relives it when he takes it out of the freezer to prepare it.
Yeah.
Because, cooking the food is the wild game, is part of that whole process too. And I think people, I guess people go through that process or that evolution, because if you don't, you're missing out on a lot of what it's all about.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much pressure now just with social media and people like judging what other people shoot and all of the negativity with it, that there's got to be some point where you just say, as long as you're happy, we're happy.
Yeah, and it just made everything so much easier. What's interesting about that too is that we continue to kill a couple of big bucks every year.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking an incredible amount of deer. We're trying to control population, and we're trying to control disease. Unfortunately, the older bucks tend to be CWD positive, and my neighbor shot one that we had our eye on. I had my eye on him because I thought he was sick, and yeah, he was. When he killed him, I got to look at him, and I was like, ugh. And he was showing the signs of CWD, the physical signs of it, and of course he tested positive. But we're also on the other end getting some positives on the youngest deer too, and that doesn't bode well for the future. So.
Right.
We know that the thing that we need to do is reduce the population, which will help slow the spread of the disease and reduce prevalence. I mean, it's the only tool we have. And in the meantime, I'm welcoming 40 people a year to hunt with us on the farm. We killed 47 deer on the 600 acres last year. I shot one of those deer. And only because it was too far. My daughter was not comfortable with the shot. And I go, oh, we'll just let it go. And she goes, Dad, you shoot it. And so The woman knows her limitations. She's a good shot, but she doesn't like shooting long distances. And so I did, but to have that many, deer harvested and have a bunch of different people doing it is a real. It's just a real joy too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd take you into a room out at the farmhouse, and you'll see a room full of antlers and heads and stuff, but. I've done enough of that, and I think it is just sort of maybe the evolution of life and as a hunter, and that's where we're at.
Recently, I saw a YouTube video in which you talked about your farm, but you also referred to Aldo Leopold and the influence that Aldo Leopold and specifically the Sand County Almanac had on you and the future. Your future thoughts of maybe how to manage the farm. So that's something that I hope that maybe we can talk a little bit more, maybe at a future podcast, Doug, if you're willing to do that. But I want to just say that I did buy another copy of the Sand County Almanac just for Catherine and I assigned her homework as the old science teacher. I assigned her the homework.
Thought I was done with all my science homework days.
Never. Is there any part of that you want to talk about that would just pique Catherine's curiosity, and maybe we could come back on a future podcast after she has read the Sand County Almanac?
Yes, I would. I'd love to come back and I'll talk about Leopold and his influence on conservation and me anytime. I'm not sure that you're aware of this, but his farm, Sand County Almanac, where it was written, is about 30 miles straight east of me. And so when he wrote a Sand County Almanac, or what became a Sand County Almanac, it's really three pieces, right? There's the first part, which is the phenology part, which when I was a young man, the librarian at our high school introduced me to that book when I was 16. So you got some catching up to do, Catherine. And I was interested in the phenology part of it because it was for this area, right? And it's really what piqued my interest in paying attention to the changes in the seasons, not just the leaves and the trees and cold and all of that, but when the swallows return and when the geese and ducks fly, and so you start marking those things on film, and that's really what that is. And there's actually the Leopold Foundation, who I do a fair amount of work with, has a phenology calendar that's a wonderful thing for anyone to have. And then the second part of it, of the Sand County Almanac, is sketches near and far or here and there. I'm always paraphrasing Leopold. So sketches here and there, and it's really more about his travels in the middle part of his life, right? And different places where he was and different experiences. And there's incredibly powerful things in there, but that's really about place. And then the third section is the land ethic, and that speaks to me now more than ever. And, phrases like, when we see ourselves as a member of the biotic community, we'll treat it more lovingly. As I said, I paraphrase Leopold, and certainly it's not ours. It's just our turn. It's just a cheap imitation of his eloquence. But it fits on a bumper sticker. So that's how I think, I guess, is in bumper stickers. And so, boy, I really look forward to talking with you about it, Catherine, and what the most interesting or powerful parts of it to you are. The Leopold Foundation is actually doing something right now called illuminating the almanac, or I'm not using the right word there, but I have to record a little video where I talk about how I first learned about the Sand County Almanac and then read my favorite passage. It's going to be difficult because I have a lot of favorite passages.
No, I'm really excited to reading it.
Well, my favorite, or one of my favorites, I should say, is The Good Oak. And I think every time it started prior to reading the Sand County Almanac, but every time I cut a tree or work with wood, I take time to look at those rings and think about the history that is written in those rings. And again, goes back to the circle of life. If you use it for firewood and heat, and could possibly be chemically restructured and come back as. So
and how that the how oak heats twice, right? Once when you're making it and once when you're burning it.
That's right.
And again, I would say I would invite you to visit the folks at the Leopold Foundation. And if you're going to do that, to let me know. And heck, I'd meet you over there. But where there's a bench where the good oak was,
Mm-hmm.
tree fell. And I've been there for leadership events and that sort of stuff. And one instance, there was about 10 of us who walked out there and sat on these benches, and part of the remnant of the tree is still there. And there's, of course, a plaque and everything. And then we passed a copy of the Sand County Almanac, the good oak, around, and we all read, and we just kept passing it around until we read all of it. And yes, halt, says the Sawyer, and and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful place to visit, and you can't help but be moved by it when you're there.
Right. Well, very significant piece of literature. Well, Doug, we look forward to visiting with you again. I'm very glad that our booths were right across from each other at Pheasant Fest to get to know you and get to know more about sharing the land. And thank you for sharing your story about your family and especially your brother Matthew.
Happy to. And that booth being across the aisle from us, your booth being across the aisle from us.
It's called Serendipity, wasn't it?
Serendipity. Beat me to it. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Well,
that was great. I enjoyed that whole, being there, having you guys across from us made the whole weekend that much more enjoyable.
Well, it was fun for us. I wish Catherine could have been there all days. She experienced Sunday, and the people we met and the stories that we heard from people and the support we received from people, say, keep doing what you're doing because it really resonates with us. It's important to us to continue to do what we are trying to do for that reason. So again, thank you, Doug. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I thought you were going to keep talking and then I got confused.
It's okay.
No, it was lovely getting to talk to you today. I know we didn't get to talk much over that Pheasant Fest weekend, but I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, there are a lot of 2-minute conversations at Pheasant Fest.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Because you just feel like you need to keep moving on. Pheasant Fest this year was particularly memorable. So I'll be there again next year in Kansas City.
Kansas City. Good. Well, again, Doug, thank you so very much. And as we sign off, we remind our listeners that if you or someone you know is thinking of suicide or in need of crisis intervention, call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. There are resources available to help. And to all our listeners, take some time to get outside, enjoy the outdoors, and experience its healing powers. With that, until next time.